Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to dive straight into a genuinely fascinating piece of rapid-fire commentary that recently blew up online. We're looking at a viral clip from the well-known YouTube personality Khaan, breaking down his take on the former Pakistani Prime Minister, Imran Khan. If you just want the core narrative without all the internet noise, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to break this down step by step and look at how a wild mix of election strategy, strict religious rules, and some highly unorthodox personal security created this massive viral moment. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's just start right off the bat with this absolute jaw-dropper of a quote. To protect his head from getting shot, they covered it with a steel bucket. I had to hook you with this right away because it's arguably the most absurd claim from the entire story. It sounds like something straight out of a late-night sketch, right? But no, this is presented right in the middle of real-world political commentary. Our goal today is just an objective breakdown. We want to understand the exact narrative sequence that Khan is laying out here. Like, how on earth do we get from a high-stakes political campaign to a former prime minister allegedly wearing a literal steel bucket on his head? Well, let's snap it out. That brings us to Section 1, the election strategy. So what's really interesting is where this whole story kicks off. According to the viral clip, the origin of this entire saga wasn't, a big policy debate or a normal campaign maneuver. Nope. The narrator explains that Imran Khan met a specific woman who people described as being highly knowledgeable. And the strategy pitched to him, at least according to this commentary, was surprisingly direct. Marry this wise, highly knowledgeable woman, and boom, that is your key to winning the upcoming election. So right from the jump, the source sets up this narrative where marriage is just completely tangled up with political ambition. Moving right along, let's hit Section 2, breaking the IDA rule. All right, so here's where the master political strategy runs into a massive roadblock. Let's look at the sequence of facts exactly as they're presented in the clip. There are basically three key pieces to this puzzle. First, the woman in question was already married. Second, a divorce took place. And third, and this is absolutely the crucial point, under Islamic rule, a woman cannot just immediately remarry after divorce. There is a very specific, mandatory waiting period that has to be observed. The entire narrative hinges on this exact sequence of events. To really grasp the fallout here, we need to understand the terminology the source is using. The commentator uses a very specific technical term for this waiting period, iddat. Iddat is a mandatory waiting period under Islamic law following a divorce, where a woman legally cannot remarry. The source makes it very clear that this isn't just some casual tradition you can brush off. It's a super rigid legal technicality and a strictly binding rule. And the parameters of this rule, they are not ambiguous at all. According to the original commentary, this mandatory iddat period lasts for 3 months. 3 solid months, where a second marriage is strictly off the table. The story presented is that Khan just didn't wait. He totally bypassed this strict 3-month gap and just went right ahead with the marriage anyway. Which brings us to a detail that the original speaker honestly just heavily mocks in the source clip, and that's the age factor. The commentator makes a super pointed note that Imran Khan was 64 years old at the time of this rushed marriage. The tone of the video here is just absolute bewilderment. The speaker is essentially asking, why on earth would a 64-year-old man entering his 3rd or 4th marriage feel the need to rush so foolishly? Like, why commit such an obvious blunder and skip the mandatory waiting time at that stage in your life? The commentary really frames it as just a highly unnecessary mistake. And that leads us straight into Section 3, jail for a technicality. Let's just trace this domino effect chronologically exactly as it's described in the anecdote. Step 1, the woman's divorce happens. Step 2, the massive critical error of skipping that mandatory 3-month IDA waiting period. Step 3, the rushed marriage to Imran Khan at age 64. And finally, Step 4, the direct consequence. The commentator states super clearly that it was precisely because of this technicality, literally breaking this specific Islamic rule about the waiting period, that he was actually sent to jail. It connects the political marriage straight to a prison sentence, all because of this bypassed rule. And that brings us to the final and definitely the most visually absurd part of the story, Section 4, the bucket incident. Now, before we get to the punchline, we have to set the serious context that the source material lays out. While Khan is dealing with all this legal fallout and actually having to be presented in court, there is a severe, genuine threat to his life. The anecdote explicitly mentions that there was a high risk of him being shot, a very real threat of assassination while he was being transported. So how did they allegedly handle this extreme threat? Well, the source presents this massive, almost comical contrast. For standard protection, they did exactly what you'd expect, right? They made him wear a bulletproof vest to protect his body. But to protect his head from taking a bullet, the commentator claims they quite literally put a steel bucket over his head. Seriously, not a tactical helmet, not an armored truck, a steel bucket. It just highlights this stark, incredibly bizarre contrast between standard security protocol and the completely improvised, absurd spectacle of marching a former prime minister to court wearing a literal bucket. All right, that brings us to the end of our breakdown, and I want to leave you with a final thought to really chew on. We've just traced a narrative that weaves together a strategic political marriage, a rigid religious technicality, a jail sentence, and finally, the surreal visual of a steel bucket used as riot gear. Without taking any political sides here whatsoever, it really forces us to ask, how do strict legal technicalities and these absolutely absurd physical spectacles actually shape our understanding of modern political controversies? It is wild to see how quickly a political narrative can evolve from a campaign strategy to pure internet virality. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning how the stories around us are constructed.